I'm Eric Jostock, Chief Plan Examiner of Construction Safety Compliance. I'm joined by my colleague, Assistant Chief Plan Examiner, Brian Eastlab. Okay, so course description. This course will provide an overview of submittal document requirements of the New York City Building Code, safety considerations pertaining to site safety and demolition plans, to clarify the necessary detail expected to be provided by design professionals on the plans, and we will highlight variance requests to modify construction safety code requirements. Learning objectives. We'll discuss administrative and building code sections applicable to site safety and demolition plans, and be able to identify the required content to be provided on the documents per these sections. We'll review examples of common plan submittal errors and omissions to help identify deficiencies, demonstrate compliance with the code, and prevent potential safety hazards. We'll examine construction safety requirements of the New York City Building Code, common requests to modify these requirements where there is a practical difficulty of complying with the code, and we'll learn and define relevant construction safety terms of Chapter 33. Okay, so we'll begin with some definitions and key terms. These apply to both demolition and site safety, and we will get into requirements for demolition plans, code requirements, minimum content. Then we'll proceed to site safety plan requirements, minimum content, and we'll finish up with some discussion of construction code determinations, variance requests, requests for clarification or interpretation. Okay, so some definitions and key terms. First key term here is a major building. And this definition comes from BC 3302. This is an important term because it defines the threshold for buildings subject to site safety plan and monitoring program requirements. Applications for the construction, demolition, vertical or horizontal enlargement, and in some cases, facade restoration of major buildings requires the submission of a site safety plan to DOB for review. The permit for this work will not be issued until the plan is approved and a site safety manager or coordinator is designated. So this is an important term because it tells you when you need to submit a site safety plan. Now, please note this is subject to change under the legislation that was recently proposed. This bill would lower the threshold for a major building construction site to include sites that involve existing or proposed buildings 7 or more stories or 75 feet or more in height. This change would trigger additional site safety requirements for more construction sites. Another code makes a distinction between full and partial demolition. So full demolition is the full removal of all the building or structure. This would be a DM filing. And then partial demolition is very broadly defined as the removal or dismantling of any structural member, floors, interior or exterior walls. This would be work done under an alteration permit. At CSC, we review only DM full demolition applications. This is a term that's not defined in the code, but when we get variance requests, we review full demolition plans as well as requests for clarification, interpretation, or variance of building code provisions. These requests are submitted on a form called the CCD1 or Construction Code Determination Form. These forms are not specific to our unit, but we review a lot of requests pertaining to Chapter 33, and we'll discuss this in a little more detail later in the presentation when we talk about alternative provisions. The next two definitions are important to full demolition filings because the use of these equipment types can determine, one, whether plan submission is required or not, and two, the minimum demolition safety zone that needs to be provided. So a handheld device equipment, mechanical or non-mechanical, utilized to physically demolish a building or structure or elements of a building or structure is held, lifted, moved, operated by a single person. So these are chipping guns, jackhammers, saws, etc. And important to note that the code does not consider remote controlled equipment a handheld device. We'll show you an example of that in the next slide or two. So mechanical equipment is, demolition equipment that has an operator in a cab or on the machine, such as an excavator or a skid steer or bobcat, or a remote controlled demolition robot like a Brock. Use of this equipment to fully demolish a building or structure requires demolition plans reviewed and approved by DOB. Here's a couple of examples of a demolition robot. These are Brocks. They come in all shapes and sizes. Some models small and maneuverable enough to climb stairs. Okay, so now we'll get into the code requirements for demolition plans and some minimum content. Oh, but first we have this slide here is sort of an overview of the filing process. So I guess just really quickly, step one is applicant files a demo application with all the required paperwork at the appropriate DOB borough office, and all the fees are paid. Then the plans are submitted for review to construction safety compliance. We do our review. Once the plans are approved, the general contractor submits a request for a pre-demolition inspection. CNC inspector goes to the site, verifies, among other things, the building is vacant, the site conditions are accurately represented in the plans, and the work has not begun. If the inspection is good, step 4, CSC enters the pre-demo request pass in the DOB biz system. And then the next step is to apply for the permit. Permit requirements are submitted at the borough. So you can submit your utility cutoff letters, rodent letter, asbestos certification, etc. And the permit is issued. 24 hours before, step 6, 24 hours before the demo is to start, the permit holder gives notification to the department. And then, following all the above steps, number 7, then the demo work can commence. Once the work is complete, the GC submits a request for sign-off inspection. CSC inspector performs sign-off inspection. If the site conditions match the plans, or the site, the building's fully removed and the site's graded, sign-off gets recorded in biz, and that's the end of the demo process. And now you've got your DM sign-off as a prior to permit required item for new building filings. So now, that requirement is met for your new building. Okay, so where to find demolition plan requirements? These are found in the building code, specifically BC 3306, demolition, chapter 33. In addition to that, and I'll come back to these slides, I'm a little bit out of order. In addition to that, the department issued a document outlining the minimum content expected to be provided on a plan for full demo. So it's a list of, I think, 19 items on this document, and most, if not all of them, are being incorporated or will likely be incorporated into the upcoming or the next code revision. And we'll touch briefly on a few of these items later in the presentation. But I'm going to go back. Okay, so this list, this is a list of permit requirements to be submitted to the borough for your DM permit. Note that plans are not on this list because some demolition applications are exempt from plan submittal requirements, and these applications may be filed by the GC or building owner. Licensed professionals not required to file some DM jobs. Okay, so now, when are demolition plans not required? There are different factors such as building use, height, whether the building is detached, how the demolition will be performed. These things will determine whether or not plans must be submitted for review. And BC 3306.5 identifies 5 exceptions to plan submittal requirements. The first one is for emergency work performed where the work is monitored by a qualified person or a registered design professional employed by a city agency. The next one's for 1, 2, or 3 family dwellings, or both halves of a semi-detached 1, 2, or 3 family dwelling, or detached accessory uses, provided such a dwelling is 3 stories or fewer in height. And provided no mechanical demolition is used. So you can demolish your 3-family, 3-story house to grade using only handheld equipment. The foundation can be removed with an excavator, and you do not need a PE or RA to file or produce plans for this work. Number 3 is mechanical removal of foundations, landscaping elements, foundation walls, slabs, stoops, driveways, pools, accessory to a detached or semi-detached 1, 2, or 3 family dwelling. Or other buildings, number 4, that are fully detached, 3 stories or fewer, with a floor area of 5,000 square feet or less per story. No mechanical equipment is used. So this is a building with a relatively small footprint that can be demolished without plans, provided no mechanical demolition equipment is used. Number 5 applies just to partial demolition operations that are minor alterations or ordinary repairs. Okay, so like I said, 19 items here. We're not going to cover all of them in detail, but this is a document that is on the DOB website, and we're going to touch on some of these items here. So weakened structures. So a statement must be provided on the cover page of the plan stating that the condition of the existing structure to be demolished has been assessed and whether it has been determined to be weakened or not, per 3306.7 demolition of weakened structures, and needs to be indicated whether shoring or bracing is required or remedial work done prior to installation or installed prior to demolition. So these are typical statements that you might see on a building where there's known damage, and shoring or bracing has to be installed to make it safe to demolish the building without an uncontrolled collapse. Assessment of adjoining structures. So this is an important part of preparing, doing your research before you demolish a building. So you need to do a structural evaluation of the adjacent or adjoining buildings and note shared features such as party walls, staircases, and common supporting structures. Information on any structures that require special attention, cantilevered structures, pre-stressed concrete, precast concrete, composite structures. and an assessment shall be performed by or under the direction of the registered design professional who prepared the submittal documents. The assessment shall consist of an interior and exterior physical inspection of the attached or abutting structure, as well as a review of all pertinent plans and records. So, like I said, this is an important part of demo plan development. It's often looked by applicants, architects, and engineers. It's not limited just to emergency work, but this is like typical for all demo. If you want more information about how important this is, see Tim Lynch's presentation about knowing your neighbors. So common errors and omissions. The most common error is the structure is not accurately represented in the plans. Items such as chimneys and other appurtenances shown in the photos, not depicted in the plans. Subgrade space is not identified. Damaged or collapsed area is not described. Party walls not correctly documented. Noggin walls, which, next slide. So this is an example of a condition that is rarely indicated on demolition plans that we receive. It's an unreinforced masonry infill for fire resistance. These don't turn up on plans until someone tries to sign one off, and we realize that it's not the CMU block wall that that they showed on the plans. So this is commonly overlooked. Okay, at the heart of the demo set is the demo sequence. Clear and detailed demolition sequence must be provided in narrative and illustrated in the plans. It's important that all phases be designated by a number or letter designation to clearly depict the required sequence of the work. Structural stability must be demonstrated through all phases of demolition. There must be a preparation phase showing or indicating glass removal, sealing of windows, removal of equipment, fixtures, etc. This is an example of a good level of detail for a demolition sequence, clearly indicated with a number designation. This is an entire phase here. Removal of the second floor. It allows for or accounts for all the structural removals, the sequence, the order, everything you need to know. This is, you should really think of it as a step-by-step instructions provided by the applicant to the contractor to safely demolish the building in accordance with the requirements of the building code. And this is it's a pretty good example. Yeah, demolition sequence, it's a top-down procedure. This example is something we don't see here, where this is actually, instead of from the top down, this is the bottom up, but the sequence is, the slide is to illustrate the order that things have to happen in. BC 3306.8.1, structural steel, reinforced concrete, heavy timber buildings. They shall be demolished column length by column length, tier by tier. Structural members shall be chained or lashed in place to prevent any uncontrolled swing or drop. So you're not permitted to drop beams, steel on the floor. There's an exception to this where the design applicant has demonstrated the adequacy of alternate means of demolition through plans, calculations, or establishment of safety zones as appropriate. The commissioner may accept such alternative means of demolition. This is commonly submitted via CCD1. So some examples are, hinge cutting, dropping beams onto a debris pile or tires. So there are different ways to do this, all submitted with calculations demonstrating that it's not going to exceed the capacity of the floor. Another example of this, 3306.8.2, masonry buildings with wooden floors. Important to note, number 2, Sections of masonry walls shall not be loosened or permitted to fall in such masses as to affect the carrying capacity of floors or the stability of structural supports. So the applicant needs to identify in the notes or in the sequence on the demo plan the amount or the size of masonry wall that can be dropped on the floor without exceeding the capacity of the floor. Again, these are instructions for the contractor, so they need to tell them how they can do this safely without causing a collapse. Here's an example of some preparation notes for the demo sequence. This all happens prior to demo, so it's got installation of the fence, removal of fixtures, cabinets, combustible material, etc. Then it gets into the demolition sequence, starting at the roof, step by step, detailed instructions, all noted with a letter or number designation. Very clear, very easy to read, easy to understand. Okay, end of demolition plans. So end of demolition conditions must be clearly illustrated in plan and section, including any remaining foundation elements and means of stabilizing those elements. You need to show the elevation of the footing of the building to be demolished as it relates to the adjoining property footing. If all foundation elements are not being removed and the site is not being completely backfilled, we need to follow the requirements of the notice, the following notice. Okay, so this is the code section that tells you at the end of demolition, here's what the site has to look like. Everything has to be removed. Site has to be cleared and backfilled. So this used to be a variance request that we would get. Then the department issued this industry notice. And what this changed is instead of submitting a CCD1 to waive full backfill or to waive foundation removal or slab removal, this can be done with a series of notes on the plans. And this notice walks you through those different scenarios. So if you want to not backfill the site, there are notes for that. And this can be done on the demolition plan. So here's on the left is an example of end of demolition plan. It indicates the berming. It indicates the areas where the foundation is to remain. You need to indicate any shoring or bracing to support adjoining property and structures. You need to indicate all the places where the foundation is to remain, any fences, site drainage. So you need to indicate that the slab will be cracked to prevent water accumulation. There's some notes you need to add about periodic inspection of the site if the new work is not to commence within a certain time period. So next, I think we're going to get into site safety plans, and I'm going to hand it over to Brian.
Hello, everyone. So this is Site Safety Plans Code Requirements Minimum Content. Site Safety Plan Requirements per BC Section 3310 requirements for construction or demolition of major buildings. So you will need a site safety plan for the construction of a new major building, the vertical or horizontal enlargement of a major building, the full or partial demolition of a major building, alteration, maintenance, or repair of a facade of a major building, provided the building is more than 14 stories or 200 feet in height, and also provided the facade work requires a sidewalk shed to be installed. And any construction or demolition work including the alteration, maintenance, or repair of a facade in a building so designated by the commissioner. With an example of a situation for item number 5, where say a 6-story building has received a lot of violations or other setbacks, the DOB would make a decision to say that your site is site safety, which will require a site safety plan, either with a site safety manager or a site safety coordinator. The exception is the requirements of this section shall not apply to partial demolition operations limited to the interior components of a major building, provided no mechanical demolition equipment other than handheld devices are used. No permit shall be issued for the type of work listed in section 3310.1 until a site safety plan which meets the requirements of Article 110 of Chapter 1 of Title 28 of the Administrative Code has been approved by the department. Site safety plan requirements. Per the Administrative Code 28, Article 28, 110.1, where site safety plans required by Chapter 33 of the New York City Building Code, such plans shall include the following: location of construction fences around the work site, location of all gates, guardrails around excavations where required, horizontal and vertical netting program, including details of the initial installation, schedule of horizontal jumps and vertical installations in designated crane and derrick lifting areas where horizontal netting is omitted. The program shall include as an attachment any department approvals obtained regarding required safety netting during construction and demolition operations. The revised site safety plan shall be approved. Location of all sidewalk sheds. Associated DOP permit numbers and DOT permit numbers. Locations of all temporary walkways. Location of all footbridges, motor ramps. Protection of side of excavation where required, including appropriate, again, department application permit numbers and DOT permit numbers. Location of all street and sidewalk closings. This is important for the pedestrians, where if you're in the middle of the block, for instance, that you're letting the pedestrians know right away that they can't get down to the full length of that sidewalk and that they should use the other side. Approximate location of all material and personnel hoists. Approximate location of all crane and derrick loading areas. Location of all surrounding buildings indicate occupancy, height, and types of required roof protection. Location of all standpipe systems and Siamese hose connections. Location of all temporary elevators for fire department use when the building is above 75 feet in height. Location of all exterior contractor sheds, all required safety netting and scaffolding, widths of all sidewalks and roadways, all traffic information, all exits from the work site. Copy of proposed site safety manager or site safety coordinator certificate is applicable, including certificate for any alternate site safety manager or site safety coordinator be on site. Such species requiring special sequences in order to maintain safe conditions with a written description of those sequences. As far as the workers who are going to be working specifically at the site, statement that prior to performing any work on the project, all workers have successfully completed training requirements by section 3310.10.2 of New York City Building Code, and a statement that also all workers employed on the construction site will receive a site-specific orientation program required by section 3310.10.1 of the New York City Building Code. Phased site safety plans. Multiple layouts of the site safety features enumerated in section 28.110.1 may be submitted at any time during construction operations to show phased site safety designs consistent with the phased and anticipated work. It's not a requirement that you submit to the CSC unit excavation foundation below 75 and above 75 sheets all at once. You have the option of, for initial approval, submitting just the excavation foundation phases, then later on submitting above and below 75 feet. Minimum content of site safety plan submissions. DOB now is up and running for submitting site safety plans. Site safety plan SSPs can be triggered by the following work types: general construction, structural, foundation, supportive excavation, and alternative construction types, construction equipment. The applicability of the site's SSP is determined by the system based on answers given to certain questions on the job filing after it's approved. The system will not allow users to file professional certification with PW2 until the site safety requirement has been determined. SSPs will exist at the job filing level. The SSP or SS waiver is submitted to DOB as a PDF email attachment. DOB reviews the SSP or waiver and either approves it or raises objections to meet before the approval. Below the slide, DOB Now SSP training link is shown at the bottom of the slide. Filing process. The key stakeholders in DOB Now, the applicant of record, the site safety personnel, and other stakeholders, property owners, job filings, licensees. Site safety personnel will hold the following licensing types: construction super, construction safety coordinator, SSC, or site safety manager, SSM. A higher this is a important statement. A higher level role can substitute for a lower level role. For instance, a site safety trigger calls for an SSC or an SSM. Either is acceptable. If if more than one trigger is applicable, the more stringent requirements are applied. If the required role is a superintendent, the site safety plan does not need approval. However, site safety waivers are always needed for approval. Construction superintendents can supervise a maximum of 10 job sites. Here, site safety filing process through this is DOB now. PW1 plan submitted by the applicant. Plans are reviewed and accepted by DOB. DOB now determines if the site safety plan is needed. This is based upon the applicant filling out the questions in DOB now. If no SSP required, permit request is initiated. If the SSP or SS site safety waiver is submitted, then the SSP or SS waiver is reviewed and accepted by the DOB. Then once the site safety plan is submitted or the waiver is reviewed, the permits requested, site safety personnel is displayed on the permit. Permit is reviewed and accepted by DOB. Permit can be pulled and printed. Where to find site safety plan requirements? Per Administrative Code 28.110.1, so location all construction fences and around the work site. The fences are shown by the red arrow. This is the construction fence that encloses the entire work site to protect the public and the pedestrians. Per BC 3307, all sites where a new building is being constructed or a building is being demolished to grade shall enclose with a fence. Fences shall also be installed to fully or partially enclose a site where there exists an open excavation, an unenclosed portion of a building accessible at grade, or other hazard to the public. Such fences shall be at least 8 feet high, built solid for their entire length out of wood or other suitable material, and returned at the ends to the extent necessary to enclose the site. There are 2 exceptions where chain link is permitted. Stalled sites, 1, 2, 3 family buildings or commercial buildings 40 feet or less in height, setback at least 15 feet from sidewalks or spaces accessible to the public, and 5 feet from adjacent buildings or structures. BC 3307.7.1 specifies the requirements for fence location. Fence shall be installed as to not unreasonably obstruct either visually or physically traffic, curb cuts, vehicle access points, street light poles, traffic lights, fire hydrants, fire department connections, water sampling stations, bus shelters, other street furniture, trees, means of egress. Location of all gates and construction fences. BC 3307.7.2, gates shall be installed, gates shall be sliding or shall swing into areas not accessible to the public where approved by DOB. Chain link gates shall be utilized in the solid fence as shown in the photos. Again, the gates can be sliding, shown, or they could be swing in. They can never swing out. Guardrails. Location of standard guardrails around excavations where required. BC 3304.4.4. All open edges of an excavation that are 6 feet or greater in depth shall be protected by a guardrail system. The requirements of 3308.7 or by a solid enclosure of at least 3 foot 6 inches high. Horizontal and vertical netting. Horizontal and vertical netting program, including details of initial installation, schedule of horizontal jumps and vertical installations, designated crane and derrick lifting areas where horizontal netting is omitted. The program shall include an attachment of any department approval regarding required site safety netting during construction or demolition operations. The revised site safety plan shall be approved. Requirements for netting systems can be found in section 3308, protection of unenclosed perimeters. Please note, no permit is required for the installation of safety netting systems in accordance with the section. However, a permit is required for alternative methods, including but not limited to cocoon systems, climbing formwork, which we'll cover later in the presentation. Sidewalk sheds. Location of sidewalk sheds, including appropriate department application numbers and Department of Transportation permit numbers and expiration dates. BC 3307.6.2, where required. Sidewalk sheds shall be installed and maintained to protect all sidewalks, walkways, pathways within the property line of a site and all public sidewalks that abut the property. Where one of these public ways is located immediately below a scaffold, mass climber, or chute, the shed must be installed prior to the installation of the equipment. Where a structure higher than 40 feet is to be constructed and the sidewalk, walkway, pathway is within perpendicular distance from the new structure that is equal to or less than half the height of the new structure. The shed must be installed when the structure reaches the planned height of the shed and must remain until the structure is enclosed, all exterior work is completed, and the sash is glazed above the second story. The facade has been cleaned down and all exterior chutes, scaffolds, mass climbers, and hoisting crane have been dismantled and removed from the site. 3, facade work over 40 feet, a sidewalk walkway within half the height of the perpendicular within half the height of such facade where work is happening must be protected. 4, full demolition of a building greater than 25 feet in height. Please note that the half the height requirement that is noted in number 3, facade work, this requirement, this half the height, is not applicable to full demolition. Temporary walkways. This is, location of all sidewalk sheds, including appropriate department application numbers and Department of Transportation permit numbers and expiration dates. BC 3307.2.2, temporary public walkways in the street where authorized by DOT. Temporary walkway must be open to the public, may be provided in the street in front of the site. Such temporary walkway shall be protected in accordance with the requirements of DOT. 3307.2.3, temporary public walkway within the site where authorized by the commissioner. Temporary walkway open to the public may be provided through the site that's otherwise fenced and closed to the public. Such temporary walkway shall be protected by a sidewalk shed or where acceptable by commissioner, provided with overhead protection and lighting equivalent to that of a sidewalk shed. 2, enclosed along with the side facing the site with a solid fence that meets the requirements of section 3307.7. Where the sidewalk shed or equivalent overhead protection extends beyond the height of the fence, the gap shall be enclosed with a wire screen comprised of not less than number 18 gauge wire mesh or equivalent synthetic netting with openings in the wire or synthetic mesh no larger than ½ inch. And 3, enclosed along the side facing the street with a wire screen comprised of not less than number 18 gauge wire mesh or equivalent site safety equivalent synthetic netting with openings in the wire or synthetic mesh no larger than ½ inch, or where special hazards exist, protected in accordance with section 3307.4.7. Site safety plan shows location of footbridges, motor vehicle ramps, the protection of excavation. Slide shows, site safety plan shows where all the sheeting, shoring, underpinning is around the entire site. Street and sidewalk closure signs. Hoist, proximal location of material and personnel hoist, loading areas, including appropriate DOB and DOT application numbers. Location of all crane and derrick loading areas. The surrounding buildings, location of surrounding buildings indicating occupancy, height, and type of required roof protection. So this equipment shown in the slide is on the adjacent property next to the major building going up, which needs to provide with required protection of that mechanical equipment on that adjacent roof. Location of all standpipe systems and Siamese hose connections. Standpipes with fire hydrants connections must be indicated. FD&Y connections cannot be unreasonably obstructed by fence or storage materials, debris, or equipment. Temporary elevator for fire department use, BC 3303.12, hoist required to serve only floors not within 75 feet of the working deck. There's a CCD1 requirements. To waive this requirement will only be accepted with a letter of no objection from FD&Y. Typically 8-story buildings, 80 to 90 feet high, requesting to waive the hoist requirement. Location of all exterior contractor sheds, 3303.16, contractor sheds and offices. Contractor sheds and offices located within 30 feet of new construction, existing buildings or other contractor shed or office shall be made of metal or other non-combustible material. Exception, contractor sheds and offices located within a building and protected from weather may use fire retardant treated wood, provided the sheds do not exceed 1 story in height and 120 square feet in area and is at least 30 feet from another shed. New code changes will include requirements for door width, travel distances, occupancy code requirements of Chapter 10, fire resistance rate of construction, and possibly permit for this shed. On the site safety plan, on the elevations and on the plan, locations of safety netting and scaffolding as per Administrative Code 28-110.1. Sidewalk and roadways, SSP must indicate the width of all sidewalks and roadways, all traffic information, and all exits from the work site. Special sequence of operations, such features requiring special sequence in order to maintain a safe conditions with a written description of those sequences. Example, picks from a spider crane that require temporary removal of horizontal and vertical netting. The SSP must indicate the sequence by which the controlled access zone is defined, the means and methods used to establish the controlled access zone, and a note that any workers within the area must be tied off until the vertical and horizontal nets have been restored. Minimum content for site safety plan submissions, where there's a minor revision. All changes, here is the slide shown is incorporates some standard situations where a minor revision does not need to be submitted to the CSC for review and approval. Something like the location of the fence gets moved, adding owner information, modification or the relocation of a stair tower in the excavation plan, moving a guardrail. All these changes need to be on the site safety plan, and they need to be initialed by the site safety manager, coordinator, or construction super. And now I will turn it back to Eric to touch upon alternative systems.
Okay, so we're gonna go quickly because I see we're a little behind schedule. So we're gonna talk a little bit about alternative systems or alternative provisions to the building code. Okay, this is a little bit out of order. So this is a memo that describes the filing process for alternative safety systems. So these are systems that are proposed as an alternative system under BC 3308, protection of unenclosed perimeters. So this is, for the building code, when you propose one of these alternative systems, you would do it under a variance request or a CCD1. What this memo says is that if you meet the requirements of the memo, you don't need to submit a CCD1 anymore. Some of the points of the memo are that this applies to cocoon or climbing formwork systems used in lieu of typical vertical and horizontal netting systems required by the code. You have to provide a statement on the plan that all systems must comply. The system must comply with all the requirements of Chapter 33 of the Building Code, design requirements, including but not limited to Chapter 16. The system has to be designed to retain the wind-borne concrete aggregate or cement cream swept from the pouring deck. Netting must be provided for all areas not, typical netting must be provided for all areas not protected by the cocoon or climbing formwork to cover any gaps on those systems. Number 5, the alternative system must be reviewed and approved by BEST. At the time, we were BEST, now we're construction safety compliance. Another wrinkle to this is that these jobs were filed as Alt 2s in BIS before. Now these are coming in, they're filed under a new DOB Now work type that's called Protection and Mechanical Methods, or PMM. So PMM covers all protection mechanical methods, covers chutes, cocoons, hoisting equipment, mechanical demolition equipment, platforms, roof protection, overhead protection. And these are no longer reviewed at the borough. They're submitted via DOB Now, and I believe the hub full service team is reviewing them. But when these systems are proposed in lieu of horizontal and vertical netting, CSC is performing a secondary review of these systems. So you can still comply with the memo. You don't need to submit a CCD1, but we do need to perform a secondary or parallel review. The system has to be indicated on the site safety plan and has to provide this note that it meets or exceeds the level of safety afforded to the public and property by safety netting systems and guardrail systems in accordance with the building code. So this is an example of a typical cocoon system in plan. This is the code section, modification and alternative systems that allows these types of systems to be used. This is the request content done under the code. We don't really see this as much because these don't have to be submitted as variance requests per the memo. Here's an example of an alternative netting system. Here's the cocoon system at the top. I got horizontal netting below, and you've got your vertical slab to slab netting below here. Now we'll talk a little bit, that was kind of segued into the next section of construction code determinations or variance requests. So, we've talked about a couple of examples of this already where, cocoons and climbing formworks are alternative systems to horizontal and vertical netting. Waivers of foundation removal and backfill are variants to the code, but you don't need a CCD1 because there's a memo that allows you to provide some extra notes on the demolition plan. So there are a number of examples of this And it comes from the New York City Charter. So okay, so this is the charter. This is what gives the department the authorization to allow alternative systems that are. It gives the department the authority to accept alternate provisions that are equally safe when there's a practical difficulty of complying with the code. And I want to stress that line, like where there is a practical difficulty in complying with the code. We get a lot of variance requests where, you know, we're not accepting a lot of requests based on the practical difficulty. You know, it's not about convenience or the budget. It's where you can't comply with the code. You got to do something else a little bit different. That's what these requests are for, and that's kind of our view, how we handle those requests. This is obviously the form. It's a construction code determination form. This has to be filled out to identify the applicant, the site. Importantly, you need to include a description of the technical topic and the code section that you are requesting a variance of, or an interpretation or clarification of. Okay, so let's go back one. A variance of any code section can be requested, but there are sections of Chapter 33 that speak specifically to the requirements for the consideration of these requests. One example is removal of damaged sprinklers. So it's the code gives you instructions for how to request this. The filed application shall include a completed report prepared by the professional describing the extent of the damage and attesting as to why the system cannot be restored. And two, you got to provide approval of the fire department. This is in the code. It describes only removal of damaged sprinklers, but with fire department approval, we do allow removal of these systems when they're not damaged. But the important thing to note is that it requires FDNY approval. Elements to be maintained in existing buildings. So this section of the code describes elements that when you're doing the work, you have to maintain these systems, like required means of egress, existing structural elements, fire protection devices, sanitary safeguards. So there's an exception for adequate alternate provisions, and these adequate alternate provisions, especially temporary changes to the required egress, are proposed and considered on a CCD1. So the work in the building requires replacement of the existing stairs. So this is going to affect the building's egress. How are you going to do that? What's the sequence? Is there going to be temporary temporary stairs provided? How is that going to work? These are typically submitted on a CCD1 for our consideration. We talked about this with the cocoon systems, but safety netting alternatives such as cocoons and climbing formwork. The code kind of gives you instructions for what we want to see to consider these alternate systems. And modifications to the site safety monitoring program. So important to remember that a practical difficulty of complying with the code must be demonstrated. So reduction in site safety oversight is often requested out of convenience or budget reasons, and the department does not accept that as a practical difficulty. For this section, the department used to get many CCD1 requests to reduce site safety manager coverage on facade jobs to 2 hours per day. There was a facade rule that addressed this by allowing a qualified person for site safety, or QPSS, to be designated to oversee the day-to-day operations, with a site safety manager designated on the permit and only required to be present at the site for specific types of work, like installation or removal, supported scaffold, or mast climber. So that kind of, we don't see as many of those types of requests anymore, but practical difficulty, can't stress that enough. Okay, and this is, request content that should be included in these requests to modify site safety programs. So you want a reduction of site safety oversight. You need to describe how that's going to be addressed here. Any additional proposed safety measures that are going to be in place to demonstrate that it's equally safe to what's required by the code. Okay, so these slides are really just covering some of the requirements for CCD1s. I'm sure everyone's aware that there's a fee involved. And like I said, these are not specific to construction safety. These are, we review these, the borough, the hub reviews them. I think elevators has a specific mailbox just for these submissions. We don't do all of Chapter 33, but the ones that we do see are usually limited to Chapter 33. These instructions sort of come from the form. The form has to be completed. This is what we want to see in your submission. You're going to have to submit the invoice or the proof of payment. The drawings can't be any larger than 11 by 17, and everything needs to be submitted in one flattened PDF. We can't have multiple attachments. We can't have documents that are 24 by 36 or larger. Everything has to be no larger than 11 by 17. It just we don't have the resources to spend as much time as we want on these, so we need everyone to kind of get everything in order for it's submitted for our review. And this is a list of the common variance request topics that we receive. A lot of adjoining property protection requests, demolition safety zone, waiver of fire department hoist. We get a lot of those where you've got an 8-story building or 80 feet in height, 90 feet in height. You want to waive the requirement to install a hoist in readiness for fire department use. Go to the fire department first, get your letter of no objection before you come to us, because we will not consider those without fire department L&O. Same thing with sprinkler removal. We get a lot for egress stairs, permanent stair requirements, reduction of site safety manager or coordinator, presence at the site, some sidewalk shed, watch person reduction, dropping of steel, use of chain link fence. So these are sort of the typical topics we see a lot of